Right now, you're carrying around this completely invisible, incredibly heavy weight, and you probably don't even realize it's there.
Oh, absolutely. Most of us are totally blind to it.
Right. I mean, think about it. When you wake up with a stiff neck, you know exactly what to do. You stretch, grab an ibuprofen, maybe see a physical therapist.
Yeah, it's a mechanical problem with a mechanical fix.
Exactly. But when you wake up and the ache isn't in your muscles, when it's that like crushing baseline anxiety of just existing, the medicine cabinet is totally empty.
Yeah, the stress of your job title, your bank account, your social standing.
We've culturally accepted this persistent dread as just, the unavoidable price of admission for living in the modern world.
And that assumption is precisely what we're going to completely dismantle today. Because that anxiety, it isn't a mandatory tax on modern life.
No, it's not.
It is a profoundly unnecessary burden.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because our mission for this deep dive is to explore a brilliant 50-part conceptual toolkit designed by the philosopher Buddhadasa Bhikkhu.
And if you hear the phrase Buddhist philosophy and immediately picture dusty robes, incense, or like mystical thinking.
Just throw that right out the window.
Totally.
This is a fiercely practical, relentlessly logical framework. And it's designed for one specific objective, which is extinguishing daily suffering.
Right. And what makes this approach so compelling is its absolute refusal to demand blind faith.
Yeah, we're looking at sources that redefine reality, change how you survive a brutal Monday morning, and literally diagnose the psychological disease infecting society.
It operates much more like the scientific method. You aren't asked to just believe these concepts.
Right, you have to test them.
Exactly. You are challenged to test them in the laboratory of your own mind starting right now.
So before we can fix that baseline stress you and I feel every day, we really have to isolate the root cause.
And the source material isolates it down to one very specific reflex.
The ego.
The ego, or what Buddhadasa famously categorized as tuagu kongu, which literally translates to me and mine.
Me and mine.
Right. It is basically the root algorithm of human suffering. We have this relentless, ingrained habit of attaching a permanent identity to constantly changing things.
Right, like you don't just experience a failure at work.
No, your brain internalizes it and says, I am a failure.
Yeah, or you don't just use a car for transportation. You label it my car. And if someone scratches the door...
You feel this visceral, physical offense, like your actual identity was keyed.
Exactly. And to really understand the mechanics of how we do this, the sources draw a massive distinction between two different ways of perceiving the world.
Oh, this is the absolute skeleton key to this entire framework.
It really is. It completely shifted how I view communication.
Yeah.
It's the difference between the language of man and the language of Dhamma.
Right. So the language of man is our conventional everyday reality.
Like dictionary definition.
Yeah, the realm of physical objects, societal rules, legal contracts. It is entirely necessary for navigating traffic and paying taxes.
But the language of Dhamma points to deep psychological realities. It speaks entirely in terms of spiritual states.
And the actual mechanics of suffering, this is critical for you to understand so you don't misinterpret these concepts as like physical literalism.
So let's apply that to the concept of birth, because this blew my mind.
Go for it.
In the language of man, birth is purely biological. A baby is delivered, a cord is cut, you get a birth certificate. It happens once.
Right, once per lifetime.
But in the language of Dhamma, birth is happening to you dozens of times a day.
It is the exact microscopic psychological moment that the feeling of I or my flares up in your consciousness.
It's wild to think about.
Think about the neurological response. If a colleague subtly undermines you in a meeting and you suddenly feel that hot rush of defensive pride in your chest.
That is birth.
Exactly. The I was just born. If you scroll past an ad for a luxury watch and think, I need that to show I've made it, birth just happened.
And with every single one of these psychological births comes the inevitable suffering, the clinging, right?
Right, and the massive expenditure of energy required to defend that fragile new I.
You know, it makes me think of virtual reality.
Oh, I like that. How so?
It's as if throughout the day, your mind keeps snapping on this incredibly heavy VR headset.
Uh-huh.
One moment, you're just a biological organism sitting at a desk typing. You're completely fine.
Mm-hmm.
But then a stressful email arrives, and snap, the headset goes on.
And suddenly you genuinely believe you are the main character in a high-stakes corporate drama.
Exactly. You are hauling around this massive backpack of me.
That's a perfect analogy. And the physical toll of wearing that headset is exhausting. Your cortisol spikes, your breathing shallows out.
So the goal is to take it off.
Right. The goal of this entire philosophical practice is to first realize you are wearing the headset and then build the mental muscle to consciously remove it.
And when you do that, you experience what the texts call sunyata, or emptiness.
Yes. And we really need to pause and clarify sunyata.
Definitely. Because emptiness in a Western context sounds a lot like nihilism.
Right. It sounds like a depressing, dark void where nothing matters and you just stop caring.
Which is not what this is at all.
No, it is the polar opposite of a dark void, which is exactly why differentiating the language of man from the language of Dhamma is so vital.
Right. So what does it actually mean?
Sunyata doesn't mean your brain flatlines or the physical world ceases to exist. It means your mind is fully active, hyper-aware, and razor-sharp with wisdom.
But it's just empty of the ego.
Exactly. It is empty of the clinging. You are perceiving the situation without the incredibly distorting, selfish filter of, what does this mean for me?
Okay, so if psychological birth happens in the mind right now, it logically follows that the afterlife does too.
Oh, yeah. Buddhadasa completely strips away the mythology here.
We don't have to wait until our biological death to experience the consequences of our ego.
No, the geography of the afterlife is entirely internal. Heaven and hell are immediate neurochemical and psychological realities.
So a mind burning with anxiety and jealousy, that is hell.
You are physically and mentally residing in it. And a mind that is peaceful, cool, and free from that clinging, that is heaven.
He literally refers to the concept of waiting for a physical heaven in the next life as a heaven to fool children.
Yeah, it's an incredibly uncompromising stance.
I mean, talk about taking responsibility.
It demands total accountability. It removes the magical thinking that someone else will save you later.
And the same pragmatic lens is applied to nirvana, right?
Yes. Culturally, nirvana is often pitched as a mystical, unreachable paradise.
Like some distant dimension.
Right. But here, nirvana is strictly defined as here and now. It is simply the state of a mind that has completely cooled down from the fires of greed, anger, and delusion in the present moment.
And to achieve that cool down state, we have to look at two massive interrelated concepts.
Right. Tathata and Adapakayata.
Yeah, so tathata means it is what it is, or just like that.
Yeah.
And Idappaccayata is the universal law of cause and effect.
So Idappaccayata is the recognition that absolutely everything exists in a complex web of causality. When this exists, that comes to be.
When this ceases, that ceases.
Exactly. Nothing, not your career, not your relationships, not the global economy, operates in isolation.
And tathata is the acceptance of that.
Yes, the deep, radical acceptance of that reality. When you see the web of cause and effect clearly, you realize that things simply are the way they are based on their preceding conditions.
Okay, I have to push back hard on this because my modern goal-oriented brain is rejecting it.
I get that a lot. Go ahead.
If we just accept that it is what it is to cool down our minds, doesn't that make us dangerously passive? Like, are you just giving up?
It's a fair question.
I mean, if I am in a fundamentally abusive workplace, or if I see systemic injustice in my community and my response is, well, it is what it is, cause and effect, I'm becoming complicit. I'm just a doormat.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that is the most common and perhaps most dangerous misinterpretation of Tathata.
Okay, so where am I getting it wrong?
Seeing it is what it is through the lens of cause and effect is not about surrender or complicity. It is about diagnosing reality with absolute clarity so you don't fight it with blind, useless emotional reactivity.
I'm not fully buying that yet. Walk me through the actual mechanism of how acceptance doesn't equal passivity.
Think about a trauma surgeon.
Okay.
If a surgeon opens up a patient and sees a massively ruptured organ, they don't throw their hands up and scream, "Why is this happening? Patients shouldn't rupture. This is so unfair."
Right. They'd be a terrible doctor if they did.
Exactly. That would be fighting reality with ego. Instead, they look at the trauma with tathata. It is what it is. This organ has ruptured due to these specific biological causes.
So the acceptance is what allows the action.
Because they accept the reality instantly, without emotional distortion or a sense of personal victimhood, they can take precise, highly effective, life-saving action.
Okay, the surgeon analogy makes sense for a biological rupture. But what about the systemic injustice I mentioned? What about a toxic boss?
The mechanism is exactly the same. If your boss is toxic, rejecting reality means complaining every day that they shouldn't be toxic.
Tying your self-worth to their unfair criticisms.
Right, and just exhausting yourself emotionally. Applying tathata means looking at the situation and saying, Given this person's background, insecurities, and the corporate incentive structure, of course they are behaving this way. Cause and effect.
You accept the reality of the fire.
Yes. And because you aren't wasting energy feeling personally victimized by the fire, you can calmly and actively decide to either put it out, report it to HR, or find a new job.
Wow. Okay, so tathata is actually the ultimate form of active clarity.
Precisely.
Yeah.
You engage with the world exactly as it operates, rather than exhausting yourself wishing it operated differently.
That distinction changes everything. You aren't accepting the morality of the situation. You're accepting the reality of the situation so you can actually deal with it.
Exactly.
Which leads right into the most practical part of this philosophy, how we are actually supposed to go to work on Monday morning.
Right, the art of working with an empty mind.
So the framework suggests we should do our jobs with full intellect and mindfulness, but intentionally strip away the blinding expectations of wealth, status, or praise.
It warns against falling into the trap of eat, sex, honor.
Right, this endless, exhausting treadmill of chasing physical pleasures and societal validation that keeps people running without ever actually reaching a destination.
Because that treadmill fundamentally speeds up the faster you run.
Yeah.
If your core motivation for finishing a project is to get a promotion so you can buy a nicer house, so your peers will validate your existence,
You are in a constant state of suffering.
you are perpetually anxious about the future and insecure about the present. But Buddhadasa proposes a radical shift. Working is practicing Dhamma.
I love that. Every second of doing your duty correctly is true merit-making.
Doing it with a clear and focused mind is actual spiritual practice.
Here's where it gets really interesting. When you look at the psychological mechanics of working with an empty mind, it aligns perfectly with what modern psychology calls a flow state.
Oh, absolutely. It's the neuroscience of optimal human experience.
Right. Think about the times you've done the absolute best work of your career. You weren't sitting at your laptop repeatedly asking yourself, is the CEO going to praise me for this?
Or does this make me look important?
Exactly. In those peak moments, the self-referential part of your brain literally shuts down. You forget yourself entirely.
The heavy VR headset is off.
Yes. You are hyper-effective, precisely because the ego is absent.
And that completely redefines the concept of meditation. True meditation isn't just sitting in a quiet room with your eyes closed.
It's the mind's unwavering focus on executing your duty efficiently, right in the middle of a chaotic office.
Oh, exactly.
But how do you reconcile this with ambition? Because the philosophy advocates for living as a minimalist, living simply while maintaining high spiritual goals. Does that mean we shouldn't negotiate for a raise?
This is where the middle way applies.
The middle way.
Yeah, it's about navigating the language of man without getting infected by it in the language of Dhamma.
So I can ask for the raise.
Yes. You can negotiate for a raise because you recognize your market value and need to pay a mortgage. That is the language of man.
Right.
But you do it without tying your ultimate self-worth to the outcome. That is the language of Dhamma.
Okay, that makes so much sense.
If you are too tense, gripping the steering wheel of your career with your ego, you burn out. If you are too loose, giving in to distractions, you abandon your duties.
The middle way is that flow state.
Exactly. You execute brilliantly, but you don't cling to the resulting praise or blame.
It's incredibly liberating for you, the listener, to realize that your ordinary daily work, the emails, the spreadsheets, the mundane tasks, when done with pure attention, are the highest spiritual practice.
It really is.
But what happens when we scale this up? Because the sources don't just stop at individual therapy.
No, they don't.
Selfishness is categorized as an actual literal epidemic.
A highly contagious societal disease. The foundational argument here is that world peace, or even just a functional community, is fundamentally impossible as long as the individuals making up that community are burning with defilements.
You simply cannot build a peaceful society out of angry, ego-driven people.
You really can't.
Which introduces the concept of Dhammic socialism. And now, just to be clear, before anyone gets caught up in the political baggage of the word socialism, we need to report exactly what the source material means here without taking sides.
Right. It's not about modern political parties.
He is talking about the ideal of living together with Dhamma as the foundation, prioritizing communal harmony over relentless personal benefit.
Think of it more as an ecological concept than an economic one.
Okay, how so?
It's observing how an ecosystem operates. A tree doesn't aggressively hoard water. It doesn't need just to prove it's the most successful tree in the forest.
Right, it just takes what it needs.
Exactly. Dhammic socialism is the recognition that human survival depends on a similar balance, rather than hyper-individualism.
But again, I have to play devil's advocate here. Human innovation, technological progress, they're very often driven by self-interest and competition. If we remove that drive, don't we stagnate?
That is the modern capitalist assumption. But look at the cost of that ego-driven innovation.
Okay.
Yes, we build incredible technologies, but because they are driven by the eat, sex, honor treadmill, they often create massive existential threats.
Like climate collapse, inequality.
Right. The source argues that true progress that doesn't simultaneously destroy the species, must be driven by wisdom and duty, not the ego's insatiable appetite.
And there's a really scathing critique of why our current systems fail to realize this. The sources compare modern education to a dog with a missing tail.
It's a jarring metaphor, but it's brilliant.
It perfectly highlights our societal imbalance. Like, modern education is incredibly efficient at teaching worldly knowledge.
Right.
We know how to code AI, edit genes, engineer finance.
But we entirely fail to teach people how to extinguish their own suffering.
Exactly. We produce highly intelligent individuals who are psychologically unequipped to handle their own minds.
The dog has a massive brain to solve complex problems, but no tail to swat away the biting flies of its own misery.
That is such a vivid image. And to cure this epidemic, the framework suggests that temples, or really any spiritual institutions, should function primarily as spiritual hospitals.
Right, their role shouldn't be conducting elaborate rituals or just collecting donations.
They should be triage centers for the mind, designed specifically to cure the disease of selfishness.
And this raises an important question about how we view religion as a whole.
Yeah, because usually claiming your philosophy is the cure leads directly to tribalism. I immediately wondered, what does this mean for other religions?
And Buddhadasa's answer is profoundly unifying. If we go back to that core distinction between the language of man and the language of Dhamma.
Right, the surface versus the depth.
He argues that in the deepest level, the language of Dhamma, all religions, are actually teaching the exact same underlying algorithm.
The dismantling of the ego and the reduction of selfishness.
Precisely. In the language of man, religions look entirely different. Different prophets, different rituals, different creation myths.
And that's where humans divide themselves and fight wars.
Exactly. But beneath the surface, the shared psychological goal of every major spiritual tradition is to stop humans from being consumed by their own selfish desires.
It's a powerful call to realize how often we violently divide ourselves over the language of man while missing the shared cure right beneath it.
It really reframes global conflict.
But to actually administer this cure to ourselves, we don't just rely on spiritual hospitals or ancient text.
Yeah.
The final piece of the puzzle is right outside our window.
Nature itself, the purest, most unfiltered manifestation of truth.
The philosophy literally suggests that if you have cultivated enough wisdom, a rock can teach you Dhamma.
Because a rock is the perfect embodiment of Tathata.
It is what it is.
Exactly. It doesn't pretend to be a tree to impress the other rocks. It doesn't suffer crippling anxiety about eroding in the rain. It simply exists according to the laws of cause and effect.
And observing that ties into the core scientific nature of this practice. There's a principle mentioned called ihipasiko, which translates to come and see for yourself.
It is an open invitation to investigate, not a demand to submit.
It pairs directly with the Kalama Sutta, which is basically ancient Buddhism's peer review system.
Right. It explicitly warns you against believing a teaching just because it's a tradition or written in a sacred text, or even just because a respected teacher told you so.
You must put the mechanics of the philosophy into practice and observe the data yourself.
It demands empirical evidence of reduced suffering in your own daily life.
Which brings us to perhaps the most intense practice required by this framework: dying before dying.
It sounds incredibly paradoxical, I know.
It does. But mechanically, it means intentionally dismantling the narrative, self, the me and mine, while your biological body is still fully alive.
You go ahead and let the ego die now.
You drop the heavy VR headset permanently. And because you do, the rest of your biological life can be truly, deeply free.
You get to engage with your career and family without constantly expending energy defending an illusion.
It all culminates in what is identified as the absolute core of the entire Buddhist framework, summarized in one single sentence: nothing whatsoever should be clung to.
That's it. That's the core.
So what does this all mean? When we synthesize this entire philosophical toolkit, it fundamentally alters our operating system.
Right. It demands that we engage with the world exactly as it is, through the clear lens of cause and effect.
Rather than fighting it because our ego demands it be different.
There is a beautiful summary in the texts. When the mind is empty of me, work is happy, the world is happy.
Wow.
It's a stark reminder that the ultimate purpose of being born isn't to accumulate the most wealth, or win internet arguments, or build a legacy of prestige.
The highest point of human existence is simply to live a life totally unburdened by suffering.
Exactly. Don't just be a follower by accident of your birth certificate. Be an active practitioner in the laboratory of your own mind.
We've covered incredibly deep territory today. Taking off that VR headset of the ego, realizing heaven and hell are right now, turning a mundane Monday into a spiritual flow state, and looking to a simple rock as our teacher.
That's a lot to process.
It is. And to leave you with one final striking image from these teachings to carry into your week, anger is biting yourself.
It's a perfect encapsulation of the ego's self-destruction.
It really is.
The next time you feel absolutely furious at a colleague who took credit for your work, a driver who cuts you off, or a family member who disrespects your boundaries, pause for just 1 second.
Yeah.
Before you react, ask yourself, who's actually bleeding right now? Is the fragile me that feels so incredibly offended even on a real thing? Or are you just sitting there violently chewing on your own mind?
That is an image that is going to dictate how I handle my next stressful email. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the things you assume are permanent. Keep exploring the reality beneath the language of man. And most importantly, see what happens if you try taking off that heavy backpack of me today. We'll see you next time.